Hi, everybody. This is Stephanie Hoover with Loss Prevention Magazine. We're back with another podcast. And man, my podcast, I'm really liking these lately. We're having some great folks on, and I'm having one of my favorite people on today. We got Cory Lowe. I'm sorry, Dr. Cory Lowe with the Loss Prevention Research Council. And Cory, you're one of my favorite people because you tell it like it is. You really do. In fact, Cory and I were just talking about what we could call this podcast. And what were some of the titles that we threw out, Cory?
Cutting through the bullshit, just the facts. I think those would be great titles.
Yeah,
I do like to keep things straight and try to tell it how it is. Uh,
absolutely.
no reason to lie to ourselves.
Yep. Yep. No reason for that. And it's so funny that we're having this conversation because I just wrote for our latest print issue an editor's letter, and I talked specifically about cutting through the emotion in LP. We've always kind of led with our hearts instead of our heads in LP. And I see you're nodding your head for those that are just listening in. And I think that's, the sort of the mission behind the LPRC is cutting through that and making sure we're making decisions based on research. So talk a little bit about what goes on at the LPRC, Cory.
Yeah, so we are a member-based research organization. So we have a few different things that we do. We have applied research, basic research, and then education. Basic research is just trends in the industry, trends in crime and laws. Applied research is what do we do about it and what works. And then education is just letting everyone know what we're doing, what we're finding, what works, what the trends are, things like that. And so there's a variety of projects that we have. And you're right, we do have to be more evidence-based and less emotional and less eminence-based. That's the reason Reed started this organization at the urging of a lot of professionals early on, is that everyone was looking to a few leaders in the industry and it was very eminence-based. So because this person's doing this, I should be doing this, even though that person has no evidence suggesting that what they're doing actually works. So that's the reason that the LPRC exists in the first place. And so we're doing a lot of different things. Example of basic research is our American Retail Crime Shrink and Security Initiative, where we're getting shrink data, incident data, and security data from retailers, and then we're mapping that across the country nationally, so that everyone can understand what the problems look like. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The data around retail crime is terrible, because it's all based on incidents reported to law enforcement. A lot of things are never reported to law enforcement, so they have an incomplete picture. So we do that. We've done work with, National Retail Federation, Retail Council of Canada, a lot of survey research. We've done projects with LPM and LPF. The ORC across the state survey for the last couple of years has been fantastic. And those are all projects just trying to understand what's going on in the world. Then on the applied side, there's a ton of stuff going on as well. So we have everything going on from product protection trials to understanding the effectiveness of mobile protective units and different deterrence, LPRs, signals intelligence systems, things like that. Facial recognition, different data analytics software, things like that. So we have all of that going on. And that's pretty much it. We also have our Safer Places program, which is kind of where we're doing these tests. So in Gainesville, we have several areas in Gainesville that are research areas where we have various technologies deployed to understand how they are impacting behavior in those areas.
Right. And you guys you're beyond Gainesville with that, right? Aren't you
Oh
looking to
yes,
deploy in other metro areas?
yes, and this is something we've always done. So like when we did the Access Task Force, we went out to Opelika, Alabama, and Paducah, Kentucky. But we also have projects that have started in Atlanta, Albuquerque, Port St. Lucie, Florida, and then um, there's a few others that are in the planning stages that are very, very, very exciting because of what they involve. But I'm not quite ready to start talking about those yet.
Right. You
So
mentioned something interesting. I think it is great that retailers try to do benchmarking, and I know there's a lot of different ways they can do that through their associations and conversations and groups that they, loosely formed groups that they formed. But to your point, if you're benchmarking against someone who's not using data and analytics and research to confirm their results, it's kind of a waste of time. So
It's actually, it's worse than a waste of time.
yeah,
It's actually worse than a waste of time. It's actually actively harmful for people to share bad data. And that's something that I've found happens too often in the industry, where retailers are not capturing accurate data and they're sharing that data that others are benchmarking against.
yeah.
Um, and it's because people just oftentimes aren't very thoughtful about the data and what it means and what it can end up doing to efforts to solve these problems. It can really undermine them if if first of all you're not even collecting the data, which is unfortunately the case for so many retailers.
Mhm.
You can't possibly understand your problems within your organization if you're not collecting data on their frequency, their prevalence, the severity of harm caused, all of those things. How do you begin to prioritize what's the biggest problem or what its causes are if you're not actually collecting data on it? I think
Mhm.
that's the thing that's most mind blowing sometimes for me, is that that's some of the most basic stuff. Just basic business intelligence for loss prevention. That's what it is. Every other unit within a retail business, thrives on business intelligence,
Right.
and then LP's kind of not even capturing some of the most basic stuff.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I know back when I was, working in the 90s, we did case management. We were capturing cases, we were recording them. Why do you think some retailers still don't do anything with this data?
Um, I think it's because it's difficult, and sometimes because it's difficult, it's almost like just giving up and saying, "Okay, we'll kind of check the boxes and get what we can
Mhm.
get." I think that it's gotten a lot better just over the last couple of years with incident management, case management, and then all the operational data and using some of that data. Um, but we've still got a long way to go. I still hear retailers who are using you know Microsoft Forms as their incident management system. It's
Oh my
like,
gosh.
okay, I mean, and it's doable if you have some really good analysts on your team, but
Mhm.
it's additional work that you shouldn't really put your team through, right? If there's other opportunities out there to make it a little bit more efficient. Now, that's some teams do have analysts who can manage all of that data that will flow through, and they have people who are smart enough to structure the data in the way that it needs to be used, and that
Mhm.
system can work to a certain extent. But you can also do much more with other platforms, other systems that you actually think through and design, um, that are purpose built for LP intelligence.
Right.
So
I'm
those are
sure,
just some key things.
yeah, I'm sure as a researcher that drives you insane thinking about all this data that's sitting out there and nothing's being done with it.
Yeah.
Let's let's talk about some positives that are going on. So you mentioned things that you're working on at the LPRC. Is there any exciting new research that you can talk about?
Oh yeah. There's always a ton of stuff happening at the LPRC. I think the stuff that I'm most excited about right now is we have a facial recognition project that Caleb Bowyer on our team is working on. It's one of the first problems that I encountered, and it's a data problem, but it's a reasonable data problem, is ORC teams reaching out and saying, "Hey, we have to explain the ROI of our investigations team."
Hmm.
And the challenge is that you never have a full understanding of the total impact of offenders on the business, especially the most sophisticated offenders, because they're sophisticated and you don't detect them.
Right.
One day you have product and the next day you do not. And you do not, if you're not aware of the incident that occurred, you can't attach that to that case, and you can't provide a good estimate of what the total impact of ORC is. And so there's been some of these odd rules of thumb that, and track down to reports that are 15 years old and don't really have any provenance, where they say, okay, just multiply your case values times 3, and that's a good number. They have no reason to say that, but that's a rule of thumb that some people are using.
Right.
It's odd. But this facial recognition project that we're working on actually gives us a way of estimating how impactful offending is in retail, right? So I can actually capture every single time an individual went into a store and I caught their face, which is going to be a much more reliable detection than requiring your employees to notice that an offender just walked in and walked out with product, right? First
Mhm.
thing you have to do is detect that person's in there. And so that's incredibly encouraging. The same thing is true with our research on license plate recognition, signals intelligence. All of these things are huge opportunities in the industry to just detect when known offenders are in a location. Um, Generate the data, generate awareness so that you can, either actively deter and intervene an offense, or better investigate the offense and the case. So all of that research is super exciting to me. Reed is an absolute visionary, and he's constantly pushing our team to think outside the box. And so he's also doing a lot of work with our Connect initiative, where, if you think about all the connections that have to happen for a case to be successfully prosecuted, you have to connect all these technologies in one location, in a store and a distribution center. But then you have an entire enterprise that you've got to bring together.
Mhm.
And then you have to be collaborating with your retail, your peers and your colleagues at other companies. And then finally, you've got to be working with prosecutors, law enforcement, all of these agencies.
Right.
So just making all those connections, that's where intelligence ultimately comes from. And if you're not making those connections, you're just not getting that. So I'm
So,
very excited about that work that he's continuing to push us
so
forward
is
on.
he creating a model for that, Cory, or what's he working on with that? Or can you
Yes,
not
he's
talk
got.
about it?
Oh no, I could talk about it, and we're going to be talking about it a lot. I just talked about it at the Western States ORC conference
Okay.
2 weeks ago. But there's a model. There is a model. Read. A lot of people don't understand that a lot of the discussions that are happening today came directly from Reed. You know, a couple decades ago now, right? With the 5 zones of influence model that helps you understand, okay, if I'm going to layer technologies and build an ecosystem, this is kind of the map. This is the
Mhm.
map of how you can layer these technologies and what you can think about. Now, recently, we've added to that and we've created the bow tie model, which helps you think about before, during, and after an incident.
Mhm.
But it's kind of it's like a basic landscape, and then you can start putting pieces of the ecosystem in place and thinking more strategically. Well, we're doing that, but we're doing it while thinking tactically as well. What are the key things that any LP program has to do? They have to affect people's behavior. They have to detect the offenders, and all of that. And then they have to connect everyone, the technologies, all of that to achieve some operational goal. So we're doing that, and we're thinking very strategically about how you build out these ecosystems and get the data, information, and knowledge to the right people so that all of that's actually actionable. And only when it's actionable is it really intelligence.
Mhm.
Without that, it's just information that you have, and knowledge. It's not anything you can do about it. So that's what Reed and the team have been working on. And the model, I think, is going to be very, very helpful for people to think about how they structure their programs in terms of people, processes, and technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to me, as a retailer, and that program and other things that you do as well, sort of just provide framework, right? So that things make a little bit more sense. Maybe I can get resources from, whether it's operations or whoever at my company. If I'm speaking a logical language that's based on facts and models, I'm more
Yes.
likely to get support, right? And resources.
Yeah, I think that that's the probably for our retail members, that's probably the most important short-term function of the LPRC. So
Mhm.
if we do a study on a technology or a process or some strategy, it provides the LP leaders with some data on build that they can use to build out a business case within their organization.
Mhm.
And so they can actually go out and solicit resources from their leadership with some kind of data, even if it's very preliminary data, right? We have our simulation lab here where we can simulate 270 degrees of an environment, or we can put people in VR environments. And instead of going and disrupting a retail store, we can do it all in simulated research with offenders and customers to understand, okay, how is this deterrent going to affect your green guest and your red guest. Your green guest is the person who's in that place for legitimate purposes, and your red guest is the person who's there for illegitimate purposes, to kill,
Right.
steal, destroy, defraud, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we could do that preliminary research, get some preliminary findings that I can at least use to say, hey, can we at least do a proof of concept with this strategy or technology? And so I think that's one of the most important functions of the LPRC in the short term. In the long term, a lot of the things that I'm seeing today, I look back at Reed's work earlier, and it's like, this is all stuff that Reed's been talking about for decades, and
All
it's
right.
just now coming to fruition. So it's just thought leadership in a lot of ways. Where and this stuff, it takes a very long time to steer this industry on some things.
Yeah.
But Reed has been persistent, and our team has been persistent. So
Yeah.
it's good
That's
to
good
see
on
all
you.
the contribution.
So I wanted to, and I'm going to spring this on you, but I'm sure you'll be fine with it. But you just submitted an article for our next print magazine. It's all about frictionless retail.
Yeah.
And the title of your article is Buzzkill, which I love. But talk to me a little bit about how you feel about frictionless retail. I know you have a pretty strong opinion on it.
I do have a strong opinion on it. It's a dream. That's the first thing I'll say, is that um, the only time in the physical world that you don't have friction occurring at some level is theoretical situations.
Right.
It's just the nature of reality. To do anything, you have to put effort into doing that thing.
Yeah.
So if I want to go to a brick and mortar store, there's an infinite number of friction points between me and that product on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So aiming or thinking in terms of frictionless sets up an unreasonable objective.
That's
And
right.
so I try to turn that and help people to think, okay, you shouldn't be aiming for frictionless. And there's some good uses of that term that I can come back to. You should be aiming for friction efficient. So how do I achieve the greatest number of my operational goals while creating the least friction for my customers?
Mm-hmm.
And that means if I can leverage friction, that balances some of that friction. So what I mean by that is, if, say, I've got a locking case, and I've now got a captive audience of someone who's going to have to wait for that case to be unlocked. If I'm not leveraging that situation as a retailer, I am wasting all of that friction, and I'm just creating frustration. Instead, if I'm going to create frustration, or first of all, we don't want to create frustration, so let's not do that.
Right.
But if I'm going to create that situation, then let's do something that's going to reduce the likelihood that someone becomes frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that might be showing them video of marketing, and video that is a certain nature and that will evoke certain emotions, not frustration. If I'm going to, build a store, naturally, you're going to have to, navigate through the store. That is friction in itself. If I can manage that shopper's journey with, targeted merchandising and marketing, then I can leverage that friction. Everything we do has friction. It is the nature of reality, and retailers should be figuring out ways to be efficient, not eliminate it.
Right.
Um,
Think of it as balanced friction too, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to, it is a balancing act. I mean, there has to be friction. Otherwise we would just be giving away merchandise.
Yes. Walls are friction. The fact that we have walls around stores, around all this merchandise, that's friction. Otherwise, people can just like come up to the store, drive their car right up to aisle 9 and get there tied and drive off.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And there's probably some bright-eyed consultant out there that thinks that's a good idea. I'll leave that to them. I still live in the real world, and I've got to keep people away from valuable merchandise.
Right. But to your point, there are missed opportunities that are happening. There's probably some bright-eyed consultant who is thinking about this maybe from a more balanced perspective. But yeah, it can't tip too far one way or the other, or the world goes crazy, to your point.
Yes, it does. And now where I think that people are onto something with frictionless is if you know your customer well enough and you understand what they will perceive to be friction and what they will
Mhm.
not perceive to be friction, then you can deliver that experience to them. So I think that is somewhere where I may be a little bit too harsh, but I still think that in general, you will never be able to satisfy every single person and know every single person. You will have demographic profiles of your customers of many different groups, but on an individual level, that's much more difficult, especially if retailers are unwilling to use some technologies that would enable you to detect
Okay.
individuals. So
Have you ever walked into a retail establishment that you've never been in before? And you're like, well, this is kind of weird. Like it's maybe set up a little bit differently. It's almost like you have to be
yes,
trained as their
yes,
customer. And I'm thinking about stores that had different, setups for their checkouts or queue lines and things like that. It's like, wow. So I, as a new customer, am perceiving it as lots of friction. But if
yes,
I'm a shopper who's been there for a while, I'm like, oh, I'm okay with this, you know?
yes. Yes, you are. And that's one of those that's an example of something that really excites me in loss prevention science. It's that most of these concepts that we use for the red guest are as equally applicable to our green guest,
Mhm.
right? So you have loyalty customers. They come back to the store again and again and again because they know what to expect. They know what the pricing is going to be. They know the app. They know all of this stuff. Um, they know what to expect. Retailers love those loyalty customers. Well, you also have loyalty offenders who also know what to expect when they go into
Mhm.
certain stores. They are going to know what the program is, what product protection solutions are in place, what the staffing model is like and who they can expect to be where at any given time. They
Mhm.
know all of this stuff. And so that friction, it's the fact that it applies to both the green guest and the red guest is something that is something I love playing with that idea
Yeah.
because there's probably more opportunities than anyone realizes in that space. What is the friction that I can introduce to a red guest that's friction to a red guest, but wouldn't be friction to a green guest, or would be so inconsequential to a green guest that it really doesn't matter, but would be huge to the red guest?
Yeah.
So,
Interesting stuff. And it was a great article. Really enjoyed reading it. I'm sure our audience is going to love seeing that in our next print issue too. So I know that you guys have a really exciting conference coming up. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Impact that's coming up in October. It's in Gainesville. I'm hoping that the weather is not muggy in Gainesville over down there. Can
Gainesville.
you, I know, but it's Gainesville. So
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about Impact?
Yes. So we've got the biggest impact in store ever. We've tripled the number of sessions that we have. We've had to take some innovative approaches to how we do our sessions to fit it all in. And next year we're probably going to have to rethink the agenda and the scheduling of sessions. But starting on day one, we have some fantastic main stage sessions with retailers and law enforcement going through active assailant incidents across the bow tie. So, you know, what happened prior to the active assailant incident, what happened during, and what happened after.
Mhm.
And the reason we like to walk through these incidents and break them down very scientifically and systematically is because it helps everyone to understand where the aiming points are. So if I want to do something to better detect when someone is approaching the store with the intent of committing mass violence, what are some of the things that I can do there? If I want to know that, then I have to understand what actually happens. And that means we have to take a much more critical look at how that all plays out. Same thing with a response. If I want law enforcement to move through a building in a more efficient, effective way, then you need to know how that happens now and where the
Mhm.
opportunities for improvement are. Um, we had that's been an event earlier this year that kind of got into that very deep. That we're
Right.
doing a session on at Impact, and then finally the recovery process. We've been doing a project and we'll be releasing the playbook, the active assailant recovery playbook at Impact. Um, we've been doing a project on that, um, and it's trying to understand how retailers currently structure the recovery process. And so I asked retailers for their recovery documents, their recovery plans, and in many cases, I got their incident or emergency response plans that may have a portion dedicated to the recovery process, but in many cases, it was not very well laid out.
Mm.
Now, there are some exceptions of retailers who do a fantastic job. We'll be going through all of that, and that's just our first main stage, right?
Wow, that's a lot.
So we have 4 other content main stages. We'll have a working group main stage where we're taking that main stage time and we're letting everyone break up into meet and greets with all the working groups, because the great thing about the LPRC is that we're not just one event. We're not just 7 events. We're working groups. We're doing working groups throughout the entire year on projects across the board. And then ultimately all this kind of culminates in Impact in October each year, where we get to show, some of the stuff we've been working on. And this year it is genuinely some of what we've been working on, just because we don't have enough time for everything that we've been working on.
Right.
There's many other sessions. There's going to be a SEPTED training session to help everyone understand what SEPTED is and how it applies to retail spaces, with retailers and CPGs participating in that session. Once again, understanding the red and the green guests and opportunities there from a SEPTED perspective. A variety of other sessions. I could go through just a ton of stuff. There's product protection trials. There will be a main stage with offenders, having them on stage, kind of walking everyone through how they approach the retail crime process, particularly theft in this case, to really get inside the mind of offenders, right? If you understand their perspective and the scripts that they use to navigate through a store, then you will know some of the aiming points. If you know what they're looking for, you know how to intervene and prevent some of their intentions coming to fruition.
Right.
So that's why we always want to get the offender's view. We've taken a few years off from doing offender sessions, but we're doing a big main stage this year. There's gift card research. This year in the organized retail crime working group, we spent a lot of time on gift cards and how these gift card draining schemes actually play out. And so we put together a gift card playbook in terms of what all the pieces of the process, and then how you can, or what retailers can do to target each one of those pieces of the process.
Right.
So there's a ton of stuff. Those are just a few of the sessions that I can think of right off the top of my head. There's many, many more. There's body worn camera research. There's product protection trials with solutions, project on restrooms, just all kinds of stuff. So
yeah,
we're looking forward to seeing everyone there.
Yeah, I mean, you guys do a great job. I know there's a lot of demand from retailers to do all different kinds of research. So you do a great job trying to keep up with all of it. It's amazing. And truth be told, I am on the BOA for LPRC, so I kind of get behind the scenes look at the preparation that goes into these sessions, and it's a lot of work. So congrats to your team for putting this together. I'm looking forward to it, and I would love to do another podcast with you after the Impact is finished and talk about what were some of the learnings from that. So maybe we can set that up, and you could be thinking about that as you're at Impact. I know I will be, but anywho, what I would love to do is just kind of wrap this up, Cory. Great to talk with you, and I would look forward to seeing you at the Impact. Any last thoughts before we go?
No, ma'am. It's always good talking to you, Stefanie.
Yeah, you too, Cory. Take care. We'll see you soon.